speakers, right? Okay, our first speaker is quite a dignified gentleman. I think he belongs to a number of clubs in District 12, and even though he lives hundreds of miles away, so he's been quite a friend of District 12 for a long time. Greg Scott has been a member of Toastmasters for 34 years. He had a 35-year career with CAL FIRE, retiring as the assistant fire chief. He led the effort for Riverside County and 15 other cities from no disaster management plan to the #1 rated county in the state of California. His favorite saying, you may have heard somewhere else, but it came from him: Toastmasters is my mental vitamin. Our presenter will share with you some thoughts about his disaster management journey and some fire management. Are you prepared? Our speaker will also provide some history and tips you may not know about making your life a little wiser when it comes to dealing with disaster. He will address a few questions at the end, so make sure you keep your questions handy. And I do have to throw this in, even though he didn't want to brag about it. Greg Scott, past international director, past district governor when they called it governor, who led our district to #3 in the world. Title of his speech: 1, 2, 3. Are you ready to go? Greg Scott.
Well, thank you, Mr. Toastmaster and fellow Toastmasters. It's a pleasure to be here, and I wish I didn't have to speak tonight. I'd rather see you, Michael, back up in good health to speak tonight, but we have each other's back, and so we wish for Michael the best recovery. So 1, 2, 3, are you ready? Well, I tried something I hadn't done for over 20 years. I put my uniform back on, and by gosh, it fits. I mean, am I handsome? I love it. It brings back so many memories to try that on. But I want to bring to you some thoughts tonight about, are we ready? You know, in the news, we hear about all sorts of things going on around the world. We hear about hurricanes, floods, the pandemic. I think we're tired of that one. Fires, of course, we hear a lot about fires. And so many of you probably haven't ever been evacuated from their home. I know I have. Up here in Lake County from the fires, I had to be evacuated. And normally in my career, I was the one that used to issue the orders for evacuations. So what can we think about when I look back on wearing this uniform? On January 1st, 1987, I stepped into the world of disaster management. What a surprise. Prior to that, I've been a battalion chief in the Monterey County, enjoying to go into initial attack fires, managing fires, and having a lot of fun. And those were the good old days. And all of a sudden, here I am at a desk with a county in 15 cities that have contracts for disaster management, as well as fire department responsibilities on the contract. And as I took my first step into that office, I was handed the county's disaster plan. And I go, oh boy, I need to look at this right away. Well, it was a phone book of Riverside County and a nuclear war scenario. Where do you think my heart was at that point? I said, what have I inherited? Then my secretary brought in 15 city contracts for disaster management that had not been honored. And I thought, oh, I have really stepped into a nightmare here. This is not going to be fun. But as it was, we put our feet to work. I eliminated a lot of county employees that refused to do the job. I hired people that wanted to learn, that wanted to be educated. And from there, we developed plans. We sent employees to training. We did the exercises. We did all the paperwork. And we got everybody's input and buy-in to the plan. So when we did have disasters, we worked well together, not only for the response to the disasters, but short-term and long-term recovery, which is so important because of getting our money back that we expended on that. Now, that first year, I ended up also in Sacramento in the 1987 fire siege in Sacramento, the Klamath National Forest And we had over 11,000 lightning strikes up there, 11,000. Now, not every lightning strike starts a fire. Some of them burrow down neat and what we call sleepers and pop up 3 or 4 days later. And other ones start fires and other ones just go out. But the point is, we had so many fires that it took, it was a complete inventory every day I had to do, prioritizing who got the resources, what type of resources, and where to put all these people evacuated, because the smoke was so bad. We had to evacuate the fire scene because of the smoke. People weren't able to breathe. It was that bad that year. And yet that's nothing compared to what we hear about these fires we've been having in California today. This was a smaller one. It was a lot easier to put out in that fact, but still there. But also 2 years later, after working on this, we had the Loma Prieta earthquake. Remember the World Series, the World Series of the Bay, Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants, and the bridge going out. Well, I got to go to that too. And since with Cal Fire, and I was the first person from our agency to be involved in disaster management, I went there to also assist and assess and be an advisor to that response of the Loma Prieta. And that was pretty tough. In fact, there was even a structure up there where the Oakland Hills fire that was destroyed from that earthquake. And then, yes, in 91, October 19th of 91, a small grass fire that was knocked down but not completely mopped up escaped near Caldecott Tunnel to the Westport in Berkeley, and had the Oakland Hills fire. That the fire burned so quickly that night, with the wind conditions changing, we lost 25 lives, 150 people were injured, 434 apartments or condo units were burned up, and we lost over 2,843 single dwelling families. That's like the house you live in. And I remember that early that 19th, I was dispatched from Riverside, Code 3, lights and sirens, all the way to Oakland City, Station 1, to take over as the deputy incident commander on that fire. And what I did bring with me is the technology with satellites and so forth, and we did the damage assessment, and we're able to come up with all the loss. But driving through that mountain there with the Oakland Hills fire had burned in that 1,220 acres was nothing but foundations and chimneys everywhere I looked. There was one house standing. And that's where I met the gentleman who had just been rebuilt his house from the San Francisco earthquake of the World Series, and had just finished it, and then it burnt down. So shake and bake, California. We shake and bake, don't we? So in 1993, like I said, we had finally finished our plans and got things up and running. So we are rated by FEMA, #1 county in the state. Now, why did I tell you about this history? Well, I'm trying to build a little background of my knowledge and the things I've been through. I have 35 years of fighting fires, and to show that it is a job that does not have that many college degrees in. There's not, if you go to college nowadays, you'll start to see some training in it, but where do you find somebody trained in disaster management? I mean, you can go out and job hunt for a lot of different positions. It's a tough thing to fill anymore, but it is coming along. So let's go to number 2. We just talked about number 1. 1, 2, 3. Are you ready? Let's go to number 2. So number 2 is, how about you and your family? How about you and your family? What's going on? How often do we think about it? How many have ever had a root canal? I have. How many want a root canal? No more. Thank you. But that's like disaster management. If I don't keep my maintenance of my teeth, or if I don't plan for a disaster, we're all going to have a root canal, because let me tell you, disasters are on its way. Mother Nature dictates when it's going to come and how involved it's going to be. So do you have a plan? If you are told to evacuate, are you ready to go? If you are affected, how can your family and friends find out about your status from outside the area? When you hear something about a family member somewhere where there's a disaster, don't you want to find out and call and ask? Well, when we have a disaster, a major disaster, we allow calls in and not calls out because we need to call in to find out what's going on so we get resources and transportation of things into people to help them. So what is the difference between a disaster and emergency? What is an emergency? Emergency is the normal resources of a local government that could respond and take care of the situation. Once in a while asking for mutual aid or outside assistance, but that's going to happen. A disaster is when the local government's response capability is completely overwhelmed, overtaxed. There's too much for it to handle. There's too many fires. There's too many collapsed buildings. There's too many streets torn down. There's no communications. There's no way to coordinate or get things going. And that's what a disaster is. So when you think about it in those terms, if we have a disaster, how are we going to survive? What if you are at work and your wife's at work and your children in school? How are you going to get back together again? You know, you have the San Andreas Fault running right down the middle of Riverside. That is a huge fault. That is a capable of 8 or more, which is similar to what San Francisco had in 1904. So with that in mind, let's put together a plan. And so if we have a disaster, we have to evacuate and our house is destroyed. If we sit down before that should happen and say, I'm going to go camping for 2 weeks, and there's no money, no ATM, no power, no drugstores, no grocery stores, no gasoline stations, but I'm going to camp for 2 weeks. Could you make up a list of what you needed to do to survive? Do you have things like Coleman stoves, camp tents, and sleeping bags? And can you store water? Do you have extra warm clothes that you can provide? Medications and a first aid kit. Do you have medications? I have medications that are 3 weeks over what I need in case I should have to survive off of them. How about your pets? Do they have food, water? Do you have a cage to keep them in or the leash that's ready to go? How about waste? A portable toilet or bags or water? Do you have a shovel, an axe, a hammer, some tools that you can work with? How about a matches for your Coleman stove? And how about the Coleman stove fuel? Is your vehicle, do you let it get down less than a half of tank? So you can't make it very far should you have an earthquake that disrupts the roads or you need to leave the area. I keep mine at least 3/4 of a tank full. How about a radio with batteries? You can listen to what's going on. How about keeping your cell phone charged? How are you going to do that? All these things you can do by listing down on a piece of paper how I'm going to go camping for 2 weeks without, again, power, a place to buy things from. I don't have the money. Do I have $400 or $500 I have stashed away in case there's a disaster so I can buy things if needed? All these things need to be listed because I can't tell you what they are. We're all individuals. We all require different things to keep us going. So think about that. Your outside contacts, when people are worried about you, my brother and over north of Sacramento is my contact. If we have a problem here, like we've been, I know so many fires in Lake County, everybody's calling, they call my brother, my friends and my family. And I call my brother and I say, hey, Jack, I'm doing fine. This is what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And then everybody calls him and finds out. That way they're not being left out by being frustrated by trying to contact me. My cell phone might be out of juice by then. So all these things you can think about. And how about your business? Do you have a business? How about your records and all your computer files and stuff? What happens if that gets destroyed? An earthquake or a fire? Do you have a backup system or another company or another entity that you could send backups to that are out in the affected area so you could save all that important information? And talk about important information. How about your birth certificate, social security information, your life insurance, all the things that you have stored away somewhere that you save? Do you have copies and duplicates of those that you can put in to take away with you? How about your vehicle? You drive that car every day. We think it was just something that's a routine thing. In fact, we are so used to our cars and we are so used to it. We drive with our cell phones on and text and talk while we're doing that. That seems to go together. I see that all the time. But during a disaster, we're going to get the water unless you have some on there. If you're going to work in high heels, ladies, are you going to hike when the roads are shut down through with high heels? Are you going to have a pair of tennis shoes? Or guys, do you have any boots in the back there? How about a first aid kit, a flashlight with extra batteries, some food and a blanket just to get you by until you can figure out how to get home and join back up with your family and to do that. So you've heard of the 1, 2, 3, and the strikes are out, but even though we are looking here, we've talked about the history, a little bit of history of disaster management, and 2, what you can do about it. Let's talk about 3. One of the things that we're faced with in this state is the state we called Keep Green and Golden. You remember that? Now it's called the state Shake and Bake. We've had enough disasters. We're back into what they supposedly say climate change or different effects of things are happening. We're into a drought now. So we're into more severe conditions. So when you're home, you may live in the middle of the city in a blacktop jungle, or you may be out in the rural area. And let me just give you a couple of tips. Fire burns when you see the fuel. Let's say you have a patch of grass that's a foot high. When it's on fire, it's going to be that and a half. So it's going to be a 1.5 feet. So if you got a 10-foot tree, it's going to be 21, 22 feet tall, not with the wind, but just by itself because of the flame length. So when you think about clearing dead vegetation or vegetation around your home, at least 30 feet, hopefully up to 100 feet. Cover your orifices of your house with at least 3/4 inch screen, and cover your chimneys or keep the chimneys out without dead leaves. Clean those out and put over your eaves and the gutters some type of protection. Clear those piles of junk, dead wood and things. Let's clean up the yard and get that stuff out of there so the fire doesn't have a path to your house. The best thing is bare mineral soil where fire can't burn, but there's also fire resistant plants that you can grow. And have an easy sign so the responders can go and find your house. It's called the address, not stuck up behind somewhere in 2-inch letters somewhere, but out there by the driveway where people can see it. My house, I've got 5-inch reflected numbers, so it's very easy for the police officer or the firefighter or the ambulance attendants to find my home very easy. And yes, even a garden hose or 2 with some, make sure the water works. And so when we think about that, if we have to evacuate, let's think about what should you do besides having that kit to survive with. How easy would it be for you to evacuate? Do you know more than one route out of your home or your area? If you should be blocked off, is there a safety zone such as a river or a blacktop or a school playground or something that you could get in there where the fire couldn't get to you? Do you have a plan to meet up with your family? And for kids to be released from school during an emergency, you have to have a parent or guardian to do that. Schools are going to hold on to those kids until that happens. How are you going to make arrangements to meet and pick up your children? How about you and your wife or the husband? What are we going to do during those plans? Have we ever discussed that? No, we don't think about it because it doesn't happen every day. So again, you might have a radio with extra batteries to learn where the shelters are, what the government's doing. I happen to have a scanner. I can listen to the police traffic, the fire traffic, and the ambulance and see what's going on. So remember that idea of a 2-week camping trip, being self-sufficient and having that list put together and having it packed away where you can load it up and take off if you need to. So 1, know that a disaster, you will be on your own and probably camping for 2 weeks. For 2, have a plan, organize to survive. Make a list of what you need to survive and put it together. Don't forget your pets. Don't forget your meds. 3, fire prevention. October 3rd to 9th is Fire Prevention Week in the United States. How many have noticed that? It's not that well planned. But inspect your property and eliminate those fuels. Trim up the trees from 8 to 10 feet and cover the eaves and clean out the gutters even year round. So think about that. Take time and make an appointment with your book for you right now and your family to look at this 2-week camping trip and cleaning up around there and what you're going to do and who you're going to call outside the area. 1, 2, 3, are you ready to go? If you need to evacuate, I hope you are, Mr. Toastmaster. Now available for questions.
Thanks, Greg. We'll give him a couple of extra minutes for some questions. I just want to, only complaint I have, Greg, I think you really prepared us for most of those possible things those terrible disasters that might happen, except I didn't say a thing about locusts or the zombie apocalypse. So maybe in your next presentation, you can prepare us for those. But anyway, I really think you've got some great ideas there that will be able to people go refer back to. I learned a lot already, and maybe they can refer to them because you'll be on YouTube. So any questions now? And when those are over, we'll go to our speaker number 2.
Greg, I have a question.
Yes, Charlie.
I really appreciated what you covered. My wife, because of us being survivors of the Northridge quake, have made both of our cars ready in an emergency, but I'm glad you covered the important papers as well as prescriptions, because that's something we hadn't covered. Both of our cars have fuel, both of our cars have first aid kits and individual first aid kits, but we had not covered the prescriptions, so thank you for bringing that up.
Well, I'm glad that helped. I dedicated a lot of my life to disaster management, and once I got into it, and I tried to really put an educational program into Riverside, and I took an inventory. I sent out letters. I did an inventory of people sending stuff back. I was able to get about 5% of the letters back that people actually did something out of it. But yeah, I can't tell you how more important it is to spend a couple of hours with you writing down that plan and your family.
We have 3 people that they have raised their hands.
Okay.
One is Ralph Dieter.
Okay, go ahead. I'll listen, and I can't see y'all, but just go ahead and ask, and I'll try to help.
Hi, Greg. I'm Ralph Dieter from Division A.
Hi, Ralph.
I bought one of those prefab backpacks, which has about 3 or 4 days of emergency gear packed very tightly in it. You said that you have to be prepared for around 2 weeks living away from home. I'm not sure how much space I have in my car to have 2 weeks of provisions. So how would you do that? Would you have a cache of things at a fireproof location, or how would you do that?
Well, and that's a good question. And certainly that's tough to do. We all are different. We need different things. So I have these plastic boxes you buy at the stores, these things with lids, and I mark them different things: food, water, first aid, different things. And so I have those I can just slide into my car. Now I only have a Honda, and so I would need a truck or a trailer to do all I've said. But the other thing is I do have a tent, I do have a Coleman stove, and I do have a sleeping bag. And so if I need to pitch my tent in my front yard because there's no house left, or I need to go somewhere, I can at least have a shelter, some clothing and some dried food, and maybe that to cook on. So you have to improvise the best you can. Okay. Yes, I think I see Karen's up next. Karen.
Greg, I wouldn't miss this for the world. Thank you so much for your talk, especially with this month being fire awareness and shakeout. Disaster management is something near and dear to my heart, and I really appreciate that you are one of the full-throated advocates for being prepared. In the disaster management that we've had in the last 10 or 15 years, the idea is to have a jump bag. And basically, if you are given the notice to evacuate, you've got 5 minutes. because usually you're going to take 10, but you should be grab and go. And he mentioned something very, very specific, and that is birth certificates and critical documentation. We actually have a folder of that's bound, that's just grab and go. Digital media, we have it backed up. So if all of the laptops and everything dies, it's backed up on Backblaze, and that's in another state. So you just download it to your new device or box and you're good to go. That's peace of mind. But when you have a family, like Ralph was saying, he mentioned like, well, how do you do 2 weeks? 2 weeks is a reasonable amount of time to ask for. My kids had to do basic training this year. Then that was 7 days. They are 10 and 12 years old. And we brought basically what could fit in a backpack for 2 weeks of food. And there's a lot of rice and a lot of beans and some spices, but that will keep you going until you can actually get help and get back to good. It's not about being a gourmet out in the field or in your own front yard. And I will attest that one of the best examples, if you're ever in Lakeport, is to see the private residence Greg has set up, because it is absolutely chef's kiss for disaster management. So thank you for your expertise. It is great to hear you.
Well, Karen, you bring up a good point. And the reason I say 2 weeks, it may not be 2 weeks, but think about it. We have a major disaster.
Yeah.
Your fire stations may fall down on the fire engines. The firefighters and police officers have families just like you. There's all this confusion, plus trying to find out what's going on and then trying to find open roadways or methods of transportation to get in there and bring all that help. It's going to take a while to organize that. Randy, I see you got a hand up.
Hey, Greg, first, thank you so much for the information.
Here's the last question.
The first thing I'd like to say is thank you for your service. And I don't think that enough of us realize or take time to, whoever's in uniform, to make sure that we not only understand your dedication as we're listening to you, but to say thank you for your service. The second thing, I do have a question. Everything that Karen and everyone else has said about supplies and having a plan and things you've talked about, I have most of that stuff in place, but a couple of things you mentioned about the shovel and some other things, I've got to rethink that. But the other question I have, the real question I have is, I've been talking to my wife and I want to get her a satellite phone because she's an adventure person. She likes to go out camping and hiking. And so my question is, I know they're expensive, but with your experience, what would you say about having a satellite phone? Is that an advantageous thing to do?
Well, I think if you can look at a less expensive option that I'm going to offer you, find your local ham radio organization, learn and get your license for ham, and then get a ham walkie-talkie or radio. That's a lot cheaper than the satellite phones. Okay. And they always have ham radio operators on all the time. So you always have that communication. I used ham radio operations a lot during disasters, because if I lose certain capabilities of the communications, the ham radio operators filled in. In fact, in my 2 emergency operations centers in Riverside and in my other one in Indio, I actually had ham radio dispatch centers built into my EOCs. I also had fire, law, and public works and medical dispatch built into the EOCs, so we could actually take over if we needed, plus the rooms. So I would suggest ham radio as operators. I know it takes a little training, it takes a little bit of licensing, but I think you'll find that it will pay off.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Greg. I think we better move on. Otherwise, you'll have a hard time getting everybody in. I do hope you get invited to District 100 Speakers Bureau and share your information. And I think your presentation is exactly what should be done in high school health classes too.